Hello, all my comedy friends. So happy to see you again. I am going to start today's lecture by taking attendance. And by taking attendance, I mean I'm calling out those of you who have not emailed me to let me know that you're fine. Abid is one of them, Tatiana is another one of them, and Eliza is the other one of them. So everybody else I've heard from. So you three, please just send me an email. Just say I'm fine. Okay, I'm okay, and I hope that you are too, and staying safe and all that stuff. And um, everything is rough for everybody these days. So yeah, wear a mask, wear gloves when you leave the house, or Okay, so let me start. Before I get, because we're going to talk about Plautus today, and there's a lot to talk about because we're shifting from Greek culture to Roman culture, and it's a lot of sort of ground to cover there. But before I get into that, I'm going to do something more fun. I'm going to show you pictures of my nephews because I know they watch these videos, and I'm going to embarrass them because, this is my oldest nephew, Andrew. I He's the one who has helped me do everything online, and is he's going into his senior year at George Washington, and he's available. So, ladies, look out. This is my middle nephew. His name is Josh. He is going into, I think, his junior year at Temple. Either a sophomore or junior year at Temple. But he's also adorable. And then this is my youngest nephew, whose name is Noah, uh, who is the best looking of the three because he looks most like me. So he's he's still in high school. I'm sorry, I know that was mean. What else is an uncle supposed to do except embarrass their nephews? Okay, so let's get into Plautus, and we're shifting, of course, now from Greek comedy to Roman comedy. So it's a geographical shift, it's a linguistic shift, and to a certain extent, it's a worldview shift. So to speak. Remember when we dealt with Athens and Greek comedy, I mean everything was very parcelized. You had city states. When we deal with the Roman world, everything is more sort of like broadly connected because of the dominance, the spread of the Roman Empire. But that comes later. Plautus is before the Roman Empire. Plautus is still writing during the days of the Roman Republic. Plautus's dates are. Oh, wait. Now I have to get my blank paper out. Sorry. Actually, I already screwed up. We should start with Plautus's name here first. Basically, Plautus. We call him Plautus. We know him as Plautus, but it's unlikely that that's his actual real name. Uh, Damn it. It's more likely that Plautus, as we know him these days, that was his stage name. Um, so his full name in Latin is Titus Macius Plautus, and sorry, Titus Macius Plautus. And all three of these names are they're basically comic tropes. Um, where to begin here? So Titus Macius Plautus, right? So fool. Macius is fool. That was a stage name. Titus means please forgive me my crude language here, but it means Mr. Big Dick. That's what Titus means. And Plautus was also another common stock name for comic characters. So it seems likely, and from what we know about Plautus's early life, or at least what we think we know from Plautus's early life, he was an actor himself who started life on stage, and it makes sense, therefore, that his name would be, a stage name as such. So some of you have noticed that I wasn't the world's biggest Menander fan in the world, but Menander has a definite influence on Plautus, and has a continued influence on Roman comedy. Romans love Menander, but the thing about the Romans is culturally they picked and chose what they liked from what the Greeks had done, a couple centuries before. And they didn't like everything. They liked some things a whole lot, but they also other things they didn't like. Some of you will have heard me talk about this already. Those of you who have been in class with me previously, but the Romans, I just said this. They liked some things from Greek culture and didn't like other things from Greek culture. They were very selective, trying hard not to use a modern parallel here. Maybe I should. Kind of like much in the same way that, modern Americans like certain things from Mexican culture, but also, at the same time, don't like other things, or it's just. I mean, there's a zillion examples I could use, and you get the picture. There are certain things that they liked and other things that they didn't like from Greek culture. So they did things like they adopted basic Greek mythology wholesale. They changed the names because the language changes, so they renamed most of the gods. But outside of that, basically the myths are the same. They adopted a lot of the stories. And for our purposes, what we're talking about is they adopted comedy. But they adopted Menander. As opposed to adopting Aristophanes. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about Plautus and Plautus's plots. Plautus, whose dates are 254 to, I gotta check this now, sorry, 184 BCE, of course. So Plautus is writing to 254 to 184 BCE. So this is the time of the Roman Republic. Now, when we think of ancient Rome, the general idea is that people were walking around in togas under the rule of an emperor whose reign was unrestrained, and all that that's not yet. that Plautus is before that, sort of like, well, he's definitely before that period, because so Rome goes through. Uh, so there's a republic. Uh, it's well, actually, it starts as a monarchy. I won't get into that, uh, but it goes from being a republic to an empire, right? But the empire doesn't begin until well after Plautus is long gone. The empire doesn't begin until around about. I'll give you more specific dates when we get to the um, plays that fall under this time period. But it's around about 50 BCE, um, and I'm just using that as a rough date. I mean, you can date the Roman Empire from Julius Caesar, which happens in the 60s, or you can date it from the rise of Augustus, which happens in the more or less in the 30s. But so that's just roundabout. Um, so when we talk about Plautus and the Roman Republic, it's not it, like Rome socially and politically was not the same as what we think of when we think of the days of Nero or Caligula, or even Julius Caesar for that matter. It was kind of different. It was a more socially um, conservative place. And so this kind of explains why they liked Menander more than they liked Aristophanes. Now, here's the thing about Plautus. Plautus, uh, Plautus um, still sort of maintains the joy of Aristophanes in the sense that he's more musical. And here's the thing that I meant to talk about. I went back and rewatched my Menander lectures, and I failed to. I realize now that, and I'll cover it now, that the changes in language are different. Aristophanes' language is very musical. It's very inventive. He makes up new words all the time. Whereas Menander's language is closer to just the way people talk to each other on the street. So, you know, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify things here too much, but like Aristophanes' language is very poetic, and Menander's language is more prosaic. I don't. I think that's a fair assessment. When we get to so now we're going to talk about Plautus and Terence, and we're going to get into the same kind of dynamic here between the two of them. Plautus is more he contains more of Aristophanes than Terence will in Roman tragedy. Um, I know I'm stepping out. I'm stepping ahead here. But Plautus, and the joy of Plautus's language, and like, so all right. So let's get into the play. Which one are we talking about today? We are talking about Braggart Soldier, right? So one thing that does not change in comedy with Plautus is the use of the stock figure, the stock character. So in Latin, this character, I'll write it down because the actual Latin title of this play is the Miles Gloriosus. So you'll recognize in English the word military here. And of course, Gloriosus, I don't think needs any explanation. It's pretty clear, like the self-glorifying soldier. So the Miles Gloriosus is the Latin title of this play, and this is a character who's been around. Remember Theophrastus and the bragging person. And so the plot of the play is about the braggart Pyrgo Polynices, who his name, well, and they're Greek names too. Pyrgo Polynices, his name means, basically it means the guy who burns cities. is more or less what it means. The destroyer of cities, right? So even in his name, it's rooted there, but it doesn't take long for us to understand that uh, what he says about himself is not in keeping with what actually has happened in his own career. He has a slave. Of course, the slave is there to flatter him. Um, oh my gosh, he says you knocked an elephant out with one punch and stuff like that. So quite ridiculous. But that's comedy for you, right? So um, I'm sorry. I did not yet finish with the transition from Greek to Roman comedy. I do need to back up a little bit before I get into the play itself. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I get excited every time I talk to you guys. But so like um, let me see what's important here. What I really want to focus on. Um, well, I don't think there's anything exactly important to lock in onto here. For except for Plautus's political moment in the 250s, 240s, 230s, 220s, 210s, 200s during his lifetime, the Roman Republic. I think the thing. I mean, I don't want to say that this is the defining feature of the Roman Republic because there were other things that happened during this time period. But the thing that has really come down to us most directly out of what people have written and recorded from the Roman Republic is that it was a very strictly uh, morally policed time period where a lot of the politicians' main concern was the moral character. And Cato is the most famous figure out of all his time. I'll write his name down for you on the back of this piece of paper. Hopefully, it will still be legible. Cato was the most pronounced, certainly the most documented politician from this time period, and his bag was basically moral policing. This is the guy who advocated things like you can only, like there's certain foods that you can't eat because some foods lead to moral distraction because they're too rich. They taste too good. So there's only certain foods that you can eat. The clothes you wear have to be morally litigated because some clothes lead to moral distractions and things the foods. I could anyway, whatever. This is the guy who got super obsessed with the Carthaginians. Um, Basically made it the basic premise of his political platform is whatever we do in Rome, whatever roads we build, however we reform our schools, however we build new aqueducts, the Carthaginians have to die. Like that was he basically ended every speech with those words. So that's the kind of moral context that Plautus comes out of, and then also too there's we have to consider the performative context of Roman comedy versus Greek comedy. So when we talked about Aristophanes and also when we talked about Menander, we're talking about performative contexts where they actually had you it was a it was a um, festival, right? You went there and you knew you were going to watch comedy, and nobody had any two questions about it. You knew that's why you were going there. When we look at Plautus, and also when we get to Terence, and this is actually even more pronounced with Terence, who's a bit later. I know I don't want to jump ahead too much, but like the Romans, they the Romans actually didn't even build a theater. They didn't even actually have a theater until the middle of the first century. So 200 years after Plautus is writing his plays is the first time the Romans actually built a theater for the performance um, of drama in one way or another. So both Plautus and then, sorry, I know I'm jumping ahead a bit here, but both Plautus and Terence, in their experience, it was about, your plays were performed on makeshift stages, um, still at festivals, of course. Um, okay, all right. So let me not talk about that right now. I'll come back. I will address that in a later lecture. Um, but they were, but it's not the same kind of like performative context that Aristophanes or even Menander enjoyed. It was sorry, I'm struggling for words here because I don't know exactly how to qualify this. But it was more. Uh, I mean, like I could say it was less formal, and in some ways it was less formal, but in other ways it was more formal. So that doesn't really. It's not the right context to put it in. Um, but they were not seen as well. See, I don't want to overstate the case here either. But they were generally not the political context has shifted here a little bit in the sense that so Rome, even by Plautus's days, Rome is a bigger city than Athens ever was. Even in Plautus's day, though, the Roman dominance will get much huger over the next 150 years. But even by Plautus's day in 250, Rome um, is in charge of a much bigger geographical and population area than Athens ever was. So the sort of like dynamics of political discourse are certainly different by Plautus's day, and there's this need to kind of so the political discourse feeds into the social discourse, so there's a greater need for like a kind of a social normalization, and that comes out in the comedy, which I think is why they liked Menander more than they liked Aristophanes. Having said that, Plautus Plautus himself is raunchier than later comedy will be. So, all right, let me shut up about that and talk about the Braggart Soldier. We have our stock characters, of course, the Miles Gloriosus, the Braggart Soldier of the title, who needs to be propped up, needs to be boosted by the people around him. I can't think of anybody in modern life, modern political life, who would fit that character type. Maybe you can think of one. But he needs to be he's propped up by his Palaestrio, his slave, who delivers the epilogue, or I should say the prologue, not the epilogue. The epilogue comes after. Comes at the end. The prologue delivers the prologue. in which he explains everything about his master, but he's in the character type of the scheming slave, right? The slave who's smarter than his master, and he does indeed prove to be smarter than his master. Oh, geez, who else do we have? Skeledros. Skeledros is so when we get to Roman comedy, now we have two character types within the slave world. We have the scheming slave, like Polystrio, who's smarter than his master. But then we also have the other kind of slave whose job is to simply get out of slaving, uh, get out of getting beat. So in this case, we have Skeledros, Skeledrio, Skeledros. Um, uh, these are names that are borrowed from Greek words. Skeledros means, well, you can guess what it means because it looks just like its English equivalent, skeleton. And Palestrio means um, palace, nice house. So they have to do with like, you can immediately tell by the slaves' names what their ambitions kind of are in their roles in the play, and indeed, one has a happier ending than the other one does. It's Skeledros who, so Skeledros climbs up on the next. Oh, geez, I know I'm not going to go through the plot. You read the play, and so you ought to know the plot at this stage. But Skeledros climbs up on top of the house next door and peeks down through the window. And sees Pyrgo Polynices' latest, shall we say, latest conquest, making out with another dude. How does he see it? In ancient houses, every house has a hole in the top of the roof because that's how the smoke from your fireplace gets out. So rather than having a chimney, you just had a hole in the top of the roof. So Skeledros was climbing up on top of the next roof, and he peeked down. So he's already a bad guy, right? He's already a voyeur, so to speak. And then the boyfriend, the original boyfriend of Philocamassium. Again, another name that indicates character. Philocamassium means lover of kisses. So I mean that's pretty obvious. I think it's a stereotypically, or it could also mean lover of beautiful hair. But in either case, it just indicates a kind of stereotype of the beautiful young woman. I mean, I really like this play because of there's I mean, again, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go plot point by plot point through everything in the play. But there is a certain amount of what I would call Aristophanic violence in this play. And that's not a phrase that's original to me. That's a phrase that actually was coined by Julius Caesar. How about that? Who said that he liked in the Latin what he called the vis comica. So vis is the vis is the ultimately the root of your English word violence, and comica, of course, is comedy. So what Julius Caesar liked, and by the way, let me just say this real quick. Besides being all of the major historical importance that Julius Caesar is, and all the things that he did, or all the things that are attributed to him, some of which he did and some of which he didn't. But besides all of those things, he was also a really brilliant literary critic. And one of the things that he talked about were the different comic poets. So he talks about Plautus. He'll talk about Terence, and he liked Plautus better because of Plautus's vis comica, his comic violence, and that gets back more into the Aristophanic model. We all know, we all remember the slapstick of Aristophanes versus the more sort of uh, um, middle classness of Menander, um, worried about who gets the inheritance or who can claim the baby's recognition token so they can cash them in, that kind of thing. But he liked Plautus better, so he says vis comica, which is comic violence, and this play is filled with it. The next play we're going to talk about is The Haunted House, which I also love, and I think I'm gonna actually stop talking about Plautus. I have more to say about him. I don't want to bog you down. Right now, like I said, I don't think I like all of the names. They're all characteronyms. I already gave you that term, so you should have it in your notes. If you don't, too bad. Email someone who does. Pyrgo Polynices is like, destroyer of towers, burner down of cities, something like that. Palestrio, I already talked about. Skeledrus, skeleton. Plusicles, who is our young man. So in comedy, you begin to see these developments. Like there's the older dude who has ideas about himself and shuts off younger people, right? So in this play, it takes the form of the Braggart Soldier. In other plays, it's going to take the form of the dad, so this is called the easily duped dad, right? So you'll hear me come back to that again. Um, uh, but it's the middle-aged guy who thinks he knows everything and won't listen to any of the young kids. But then you have the younger kids who come along and know that they can take advantage because, you yeah. So Plusicles is our handsome young man out to make his fame and fortune. We already talked about Philocomacion. And then, of course, you have the two hookers with the heart of gold. This is a stock character that I've already talked about. But, of course, once the stock character is established, they're going to come back again and again. So you have Milphidippa and what's the other one's name? Archroteliutum. Milphidippa, her name is Eyelashes. So she's, got all the makeup going on. That's what they do. Like, that's when they're in the play. That's how they flatter the Braggart Soldier, and that's all part of the play is how they decide that they're going to flatter, and they're included in the whole plot about getting the girl out from Pyrgo Polynices' control. It's not the word that I wanted to use, but that's the one I will use. And they're involved in all of that. They flatter him because he's easily flattered. That's the whole point. Like, you tell a guy what he wants to hear, and he's putty in your hands. So that's basically the basic plot of the whole play. So Milphidippa, her name is Eyelashes, and then you have Acroteliutum, which means like acro means peaks. Tele is your goal, the telos of what you're after. So acroteliutum means like the peak of perfection, like super hot. That's what her name is meant to indicate. But again, these are the stock characters of the hooker of the heart of gold. and they are of lower class in the same way that the two slaves, Scaledrios and Palestrio, are also they also fit into that whole. Um, so there's this class structure that goes on here too. I won't go like Roman culture was very. I say Roman culture as if this is a surprise or any different to where we all live now. But Roman culture was very class divided, even to the extent that, like, the jobs that you could have were defined by the class that you came from. And again, I don't want to dwell on this. It's too depressing to talk about right now in our current situation. So yeah, I'll shut up. And so I think that's long enough for today. I love you all. Eliza, Abid, and who else was the one that was missing? Eliza, Abid, and Tatiana, I'd love to hear from you. Just so that, just, there's nothing important that you have to say. Just say, hey, I'm okay. Um, and that'll be good enough. Um, and if you don't, then, I don't know. Yeah, so I'm tempted to show my pictures of my nephews again, but I won't do that because that's probably boring for you. Um, um, so yeah, that's it for Plautus and the Braggart Soldier. I mean, like I talked about, it has certain aspects to it which are closer to Aristophanes. There's a lot of slapstick that happens in Braggart Soldier. Plautus's language in this play is quite musical, and which obviously it's hard to bring out when when you're reading a translation. But so it has elements of Aristophanes, but remember this is early. This is in the we don't know what year this play was produced, but it couldn't possibly have been before the year 200 BCE. Um, and and so it's closer in time to Aristophanes, and it's a kind of a more it's a step like it's closer to Aristophanes than it is to Menander. We're gonna do one more play by Plautus, the haunted house, and then we're gonna talk about Terence. And Terence's comedy is more like Menander. But both Plautus and Terence, like if you read not just the plays, but if you read the introductions of the plays, they both say, "I took this plot from Menander." Like they say it flat out. So um, the influence of Menander remains important in that respect, and so it's like Aristophanes in the sense that like it's comic and there's some references to sexuality. Now, Romans they were, how can I phrase this without being condescending, without sounding condescending? They were not as comfortable with overt references to sex as as we saw with Aristophanes. They were, I'm trying really hard not to use the word uptight here, but I've just said it, so now it's out there, so too bad. They were a bit more, they were just more kind of, there was this kind of wider sense of what I think, I mean, again, I can use terms, but when you use terms, they come with value, weights, and I'm not trying to, give value judgments about, Roman culture or anybody's culture for that matter. But the Romans were more, I think, what we would call in our own language, in our own modern American language, they were more socially conservative. So less comfort with references to penises and boobs and that sort of thing, and poop, and all the things that we read about in Aristophanes. They go away. Even in Plautus, who is looser than the later Roman comics are. I say looser, what I mean is like freer in terms of offensive speech, right? So we taught like so now. So I say these things, and it sounds like I'm just talking off the cuff. But remember, this goes back to Archilochos and what we talked about in staged comedy, and the idea of shameful speech. Right. This is an important part of how we understand comedy. You can say things on stage you can't say in real life. Now it's a bit more abundant in Plautus than it is in Terence. Anyway, I'll stop talking now because I don't want to dig myself too deep a hole here. I'll have a chance later to revisit this and say things that are even less comprehensible at some stage. But I love you all. Please all of you, let me know that you're okay. I miss you all, and I wish I was with you. So, okay, bye.